Despite her familiarity, she allowed him this liberty. He was so kind to them. She had a gut feeling that Michael had gotten them into big trouble. He got involved in a poker game and foolishly lost all the money they were carrying with them. She was furious about this. The further trip became a real test for them. Thank God they paid for the stagecoach ride in advance, otherwise they would never have gotten here. The conversation at the bank also bothered her. Michael told her that he had wired them the money up front. After a month on the road, she expected them to be waiting for them. Before Jake fed her, she and Michael hadn't eaten in days. They were broke. Larry walked out of the bank just as they were passing by. "Mrs. Bronson, I received a telegram with an answer to your question about the money transfer. Your husband closed his account entirely in cash, and there was no transfer through our bank. Perhaps he made the transfer via Western Union." "Thank you, Larry," she said with difficulty. Michael was very determined about transferring money through the bank. He insisted it was safer this way. After he lost their savings in a poker game, they had nothing that would allow them to set up a ranch. How is she going to pay for the groceries and supplies she just ordered? Jake realized she was upset and took the initiative. "Transfer $100 from my account to hers." "No," she shouted. "You've already done so much for us." "I just helped a neighbor who was in trouble. Won't you do the same for me?" Trembling and crying, she nodded. "Come on, let's go find Michael. Maybe it's time to find out the truth." He gave her a minute to take a small handkerchief from her purse and wipe away her tears, and then he took her hand again. Emily looked up at him. "Tell me honestly, are you helping us or me?" "Honestly," he said, biting his lip, hating to admit it, "to you." "Why, you know that I'm married?" "Over the years, I have seen dozens of men like Michael. He is a child. He has the body of a man, but the mind of a child. They have no idea what they're getting themselves into. They just have weird, high-flown ideas about what the West is. If weather, Indians, or wild animals don't get to them, bandits or ruffians will. And almost every one of these idiots left behind a pretty wife in trouble. Every girl working in the saloon was once a wife who found herself abandoned and ruined here. I couldn't let this happen to you." "But you use them." He sighed. "Yes, I'm not married, and I have no one else. But I always treat them well and pay them all night. That way they don't have to sleep with 6 to 10 smelly cowboys to make money. I always tip them well after that, because most of them are saving money to get out of here and back home. Good tips help them." "Sleeping with 6 to 10 men a night?" Her face turned ashen from shock. She couldn't even imagine. "It's a hard life, Emily. It eats them up very quickly." They turned and started walking again. She became curious. "So, why aren't you married?" "Until you walked out of the hotel door this morning, I had never seen a woman who took my breath away." He was being brutally honest. Jake was clearly a fan of hers, Emily thought. This made her happy. Life with Michael was starting to look pretty bad. What woman in her right mind would want to become a slut in a saloon? Emily stopped Jake and wrapped her arms around his muscular chest, enjoying touching him. Decency be damned. Jake, bless his heart, rose to the occasion in her time of need, and although he was attracted to her, he asked for nothing in return. "Thank you for everything you did, Jake. And if these 10 cowboys were like you, life wouldn't be so bad," she teased him. He hugged her back. "That was nice," he said thoughtfully. "Let's go look for Michael." As if on cue, Michael rushed out of Myrtle's store and spotted them. He waved and ran along the boardwalk. Right in Bill's path. Bill was a man with a reputation for hating greenhorns with a passion. Newcomers. Over the past year, he instigated fights and shot 2 strangers, even though they were unarmed. Even worse, he got away with it. The few witnesses were too frightened by his weapon to tell the sheriff the truth. "Shit," Jake cursed. It was bad. "What?" she asked, just in time to see Bill stick out his leg and Michael fly, landing on the ground with a cry of pain. Before he could get up, Bill kicked him in the ribs, causing another cry of pain. Jake was already moving down the street. Bill pulled out a revolver and Jake knew he intended to shoot Michael. "Bill," Jake's voice was heard on the street. Bill raised his head, grinned, and began to raise the revolver in Michael's direction. Emily, holding her knuckles in her mouth, frightened by this terrible scene, heard 3 pops, so close together that they were almost indistinguishable. Jake did it so quickly that she barely had time to see his hand. Bill seemed to explode from the inside. Blood spurted from his mouth, joining the growing blood stains on his shirt before the revolver slipped from limp fingers and he collapsed onto the plank floor. She looked in a shocked daze as Jake stood in the midday sun, calmly reloading his revolver as loud, piercing screams rang out. She realized that it was Michael screaming over and over again like a little girl. The contrast couldn't be greater. One was a man, the other was a boy. She's stuck with a boy. Jake had just shot a man, taken a life, and did it without hesitation to save her worthless husband. Emily's entire feminine essence became sticky, and for the first time in her life, she realized that she wanted a man. Jake finally walked up to Michael and punched him in the face several times, telling him to get a grip. Michael sat on the edge of the boardwalk and cried. When the sheriff arrived, Jake told him what happened, which was confirmed by several witnesses. The sheriff ruled it self-defense, and it was over. By law, Bill's property now belonged to Jake. Jake searched Bill's pockets and took his gun. He gave the $50 he found to Emily and the weapon to Michael. They will pick up the horse and saddle from the stables later. "You need to learn how to defend yourself before you get killed," Jake told him. "We'll start tomorrow when we get to your station." Emily had her own questions. "Where is all our money?" "I lost them at that poker game," he admitted, still snoring. "What about bank transfers?" "I never did." "You're a pathetic piece of shit. It's because of you that we got into so much trouble. The only thing that saves us is Jake's mercy. He even saved your worthless life. It would be better if he let Bill kill you." She angrily walked up to Jake and brazenly took his hand. "Thank you for standing up for Michael." They sat on a bench in front of the hotel while Michael sat sulking on the boardwalk down the street, drawing in the dirt with a stick. It took Emily a long time to cool down. After all, she didn't marry Michael out of love. After thinking about it, she realized that she agreed to marry him because she had no other choice at the time. There were few suitable men where they lived. Finally, she spoke. "I don't know whether to thank you for saving his worthless life or kick your ass for stopping Bill from shooting him." Suddenly becoming a widow seems quite attractive. Jake laughed. "Glad I'm not Michael now. Besides owning the ranch, he lost all our money in a stupid poker game last week. He lied about the bank transfer. I don't even want to be near him right now. Without you, I'd be one of those sluts looking for a job in a saloon." "This will never happen." He raised his eyebrows, looking at her. "I would film you every night." Her anger instantly evaporated, and she slapped his arm with a giggle. "This is the most indecent but wonderful proposal I have ever received, sir. Perhaps a more suitable proposal would be to have dinner with me. A mile out of town, Martin is having a barn dance, and we could go there and take part in it. This should be fun. There will be a lot of families there. You will be able to meet them." Emily looked thoughtfully further along the boardwalk at a sulking Mikhail, intently drawing with a stick. "JK, this is not at all decent." But she couldn't help but smile at him to take the edge off her words. She jerked her thumb at Mikhail. "What about him?" "I don't want to watch him all night. Today is Saturday, and the saloons will be full of people. Lots of drunks with weapons and a desire to fight. The safest place for him is your hotel room. I'll ask the restaurant to send him dinner. Tomorrow, the carts will be loaded and ready. We can go to new places to settle down. I'll spend some time teaching him how to use a weapon. Then maybe he will survive here." Thinking about Michael made her angry again. She didn't want to be near him right now, and she had no desire to sit in a hotel room with him tonight. Dinner and dancing with Jake was extremely inappropriate, but it sounded great. Suddenly, she didn't care about decorum. She could let her hair down, something she had been missing lately. After taking care of Michael and having a good dinner, they went to the stables to pick up Jake's horse. Emily had never ridden a horse before, so Jake jumped into the saddle, leaned over and picked her up with one hand, placing her in the saddle sideways to him. Emily was delighted with such strength in the man. She knew for sure that Michael would never be able to lift her like that. Going to the dance, she felt so safe with him, his arms wrapped around her, holding her in the saddle. His handsome face was next to hers, their warm breath mingling. She felt herself relax until their bodies were pressed comfortably against each other, the horse's slight rocking gait holding them close. For the first time in a long time, she felt satisfied. There was no doubt about his attraction. She felt his aroused male tool pressing against her thigh. He seemed so big compared to Michael. Surely it couldn't just be him. At the barn gathering, she had a great time learning how to square dance and responded to her partner quickly and without mistakes. Everyone welcomed her. No one was bothered that she came not with her husband, but with another man. There was a lot of gossip about today's story, and people were coming up to Jake and thanking him for ridding the town of a wormy apple like Bill. She met a lot of people and received several invitations once she settled down. She had a couple of shots of whiskey with Jake, which resulted in her giggling and flirtatious behavior. All the young, unmarried girls who approached Jake and asked him to dance seemed to make her feel bad about him. She was pleased that Jake respectfully turned them all down, and she did the same with any requests. The evening was fun. Everyone was dancing and having fun until there was a lull. The couple had been slow dancing for the last half hour, and she found herself in Jake's arms, pressed against his body, aroused and wanting him. When he, dancing, distracted her into a dark corner and allowed himself a kiss, she greeted him and kissed him back, gently exploring each other's lips. When his hand found her ass and pulled it even closer to his steel, aroused tool, she gasped and pressed even harder. During the last dance, they hugged each other tightly, swaying in one place on the dance floor. Emily discreetly undid a few buttons on Jakey's shirt and rubbed her face against his chest, enjoying the curly chest hair and warm skin. Taking a deep breath, Emily felt his manly skent lighting a fire between her legs. Jake was undoubtedly a man. She had never felt such feelings with Michael or any other suitor. People began to pack up their carts and mount their horses to go home. Jake helped her up so she was sitting properly in the saddle this time, and then sat behind her. His arousal was obvious and rubbed against her ass, while her womanly buttocks rubbed up and down against the pommel of the saddle. From the light step of the horse, a fire soon flared up between its legs. Finding herself in his arms, she relaxed, pressing her cheek to his face, rough from the day's hair. Enjoying the new sensations running through her body, she closed her eyes, enjoying his masculinity. However, with so many horsemen and carts, it was painful. "Isn't there a secluded place here?" she finally whispered. "We can take the next path, but it's 3 times further." "Wonderful," she purred. When they were finally out of sight, Jake headed towards the familiar meadow. Dismounting, he spread out his camp blankets, and immediately their clothes came off until they were both naked in the moonlight, looking at each other hungrily. Her eyes widened when she saw his large, erect male tool. "Oh God, where are you going to put all this?" she asked worriedly. "Is Michael small?" She raised her little finger. "He rubs his little thing right here on top and then squirts his juice all over my stomach before you can say Jehoshaphat." "He'll do," he told her, taking her in his arms, and they sank onto the blankets together. She stopped him for a moment. "I've never done this with anyone but Michael. I'm not a woman of easy virtue, so just this once and don't think badly of me." "Emily, I would never have thought that you were a woman of easy virtue," Jake said soothingly. From Michael's description of his efforts, Jake realized that she had no idea about foreplay. He kissed her and rubbed against her private part for several minutes, feeling her whimper with pleasure. His mouth found the breast and caressed the bud for a while before moving on to the next one. He felt her suffocating with desire. He sank lower, hearing her alarmed groan. "What are you doing, Jake? You... Oh!" His tongue found her little lady button, licking and caressing it, showing how much he craved her. Her hands grabbed his head, and her hips rose, and greedily pressed him to her, and now she was screaming about her pleasure into the dark night. He carried her into the heavens 3 times before gliding upward. She gasped, "Oh, Jake, I've never experienced anything like this. Is this what they call a climax? I've never had one. Unbelievable, that's all he could think. How could Michael be so ignorant?" "Yes, that's true," he replied. She was ready for him. Her eyes widened in surprise as Jake slid inside. They both sighed in pleasure as he bottomed out and hugged her tightly, looking into her eyes. "Told you so," he said cheerfully. "Fits perfectly." A minute later, she was screaming Jake's name at the top of her lungs as they both reached the finish line. The second time was even better than the first. She learned quickly and soon was giving as much as she received. The third time, she wrapped her arms and legs tightly around him, and they simply rode on the soft waves pulsating through their bodies. Jake grabbed her shoulders, pressing her head to his. Her soft croons of "Oh, Jake, Jake, Jake" were interspersed with searing kisses and his quiet words of "Emily, oh, Emily." This is what it means to be a woman, she realized later, beaming after mating. This was missing in her life. She swore she would never miss it again. It was another woman who was traveling with him to the city. She was wearing only her petticoat. Everything else was packed in her saddlebags. She pressed herself close to him, wrapped her arms around him, buried her face in the crook of his neck, kissing him tenderly from time to time. Jake hugged her tightly, and when they entered the city, she did not move. She didn't care who saw them. She gave a sign that she now belonged to Jake. The clerk didn't bat an eyelid when Jake brought her half-naked in his arms and demanded her honeymoon number. There was no sound of protest as the hotel door clicked shut behind them, leaving her husband upstairs, alone, unloved, and unwanted. This is what her wedding night should have been like, Emily thought the next morning. Her body was glowing and her skin was tingling with the desire to possess Jake even more. They made love all night, falling asleep, waking up and connecting again. She had already lost count of the number of pleasures brought to her. It was a lot, a lot. Michael never achieved one. She wondered what was holding Jake back. He left to deliver breakfast and check on Michael. He had been gone for quite some time and she was horny again and thirsty for his love. Upstairs, Jake found Michael beaten to a pulp. His face was bloody and bruised, his nose completely flattened. His hands were scratched and his new clothes were torn. He lay in bed, barely able to breathe through his swollen mouth, which was now missing several teeth. Someone did a lot of work on it, but it was the smell of stale alcohol coming from his breath that told Jake where to start searching. Going downstairs, he asked the clerk to send for Doc and asked several people to carry Michael to Doc's small hospital room. Then he headed to the saloon. It's time for questions. A group of men were playing poker at a corner table, and when Morgan, a professional gambler, saw Jake, he threw down his cards and told the others to take a break. "I was waiting for you, Jake. After you shot Billy because of your friend, I thought you might take what happened to him last night as something personal." Jake sat down, weapon at the ready. He liked Morgan, played with him many times, and considered him an honest man. "What's happened?" "Your friend showed up here last night and got involved in a game with me and some others, claiming that he had the means to play, so we let him play and drink on credit. After all, he was your friend. We caught him cheating when he made a huge bet of $50. It was the most clumsy thing I've ever seen. I don't think he's done this before. I won the hand, and when we demanded to pay, he admitted that he had no money. Jake, he got beat up pretty bad. A lot of guys would have killed him, but because of you, they only beat him up." Jake thought that was more than fair. For card cheating, people were shot, hanged, even smeared with tar and feathers, and then driven out of the city. He believed Morgan, that stupid asshole Michael. He was told to stay in his room for his own safety, but here he is, drinking and cheating at cards, letting people think Jake has his back. "That's not all," Morgan said gloomily. He reached into his vest and pulled out a piece of paper, unfolded it, and placed it in front of Jake. This was the document for the new ranch, issued to Morgan. He gave it to me so that I could get it for the bet when he was taken to his room. Jake examined the document and was shocked that it only mentioned Michael. Emily was not listed as the owner of the site. Jake was furious. He wanted only one thing: to find Michael and put a hole in his useless head. Morgan became alarmed at his growing anger. "Jake, this is not for you, Morgan. I wish I could kill that stupid son of a bitch. He deserves it. So what are we gonna do here? A $500 ranch is too much to pay for a $50 bet." Morgan walked up to the bar and picked up a fountain pen and ink. "I like you, Jake. You're one of the good guys. You know how to handle a gun, but you always try to do the right thing, like yesterday, when you stopped Billy. I make good money from cards, and I don't have to steal people's property." "What is her name?" Emily Bronson." Morgan signed the deed in the name of Emily Bronson and handed it to Jake. "I understand your disappointment, Jake. I would have put a bullet in that idiot's head yesterday if I didn't think you'd take it badly. I saw you yesterday with his wife and you looked good together. If she's stupid enough to stay with him, well," he shrugged, "I hope she ends up with you." Jake nodded. "Me too. Thanks for that, Morgan. This means a lot to me. I've got your back if you get into trouble and need help. Just let me know." "Necessarily. Do you look a little tired, Jake?" He couldn't help himself. "That woman completely wore me out last night," he admitted. They laughed together. Morgan poured them a glass of whiskey, and they raised a toast to the willing women and then shook hands. Jake went to Doc to see how Michael was doing. Doc said he was badly hurt and had a broken nose and ribs. He needs bed rest and pain relief for the next few days. Jake paid for it and asked Doc to tell Michael that Billy's horse would be waiting for him at the stables when he was better. Whether Michael knew how to ride a horse or not, Jake didn't care anymore. He could walk 20 miles if he could not ride. He went to the stables and agreed to pay for Billy's horse until Michael needed it. The carts were loaded and Swampers stood ready outside the dry goods store. Knowing that they would be driving quite slowly, he told them to just drive. They knew where the old Wilson house was. By the time he returned, Emily had already dressed and was worried, wondering if something had happened to him, especially when he showed up without the breakfast he had left for. He took her to a restaurant to eat. When they finished, he told her what Michael had done the night before. So he got drunk, tried to cheat at cards, got beaten up, and then signed a contract to sell our property to pay the $50 bet. Disbelief was evident in her upset voice. She examined the property deed, noticing that Michael hadn't even included her on it. "So this Morgan just gave me the ranch?" Jake nodded. Having finished breakfast, she stood up. "Where is this Morgan?" "In the saloon." Jake was amazed when she walked straight into the saloon, as if women did this every day. He had to admit that she had courage. Jake pointed at Morgan and Emily walked over to him, took his cards and put them down, spread his arms and then sat on his lap, wrapping her arms around his neck. As a sign of gratitude, she kissed him on the cheek. "Come see us anytime, Morgan. There will always be food and bed for you. Thank you for your generosity." Jake noticed a tear roll down Morgan's cheek. "Morgan?" "Just an old memory, Jake. A real old memory," he said with a deep sigh. Since Emily had nothing else to do, she refused to go to Michael. In her opinion, he got what he deserved. They packed their things and went to the ranch. Emily rode sideways in the saddle, clinging to Jake, feeling calm and confident in his arms. They passed the carts halfway, and when they arrived at 2 houses, Jake decided that the carts were 2 hours behind. They toured the new living quarters, finding that Jakey's was considerably larger, with a large bedroom attached to the main room for privacy. The owner left the old bed as an inheritance. It was huge and strong. Emily bounced on her a few times, then stood up and threw off her dress. There was nothing underneath. She jumped back onto the bed and smiled widely at Jake. "Do you have any ideas, Jake? This is true." Jake filled it once and then hungrily returned for a second. Emily opened her eyes and looked at Jake. It was clear from his face that he loved her. "Say it," she demanded. "What?" "You know, I love you, Emily, and I want you to marry me." "I love you too, Jake, and yes, I will marry you as soon as I can get a divorce from that useless husband of mine. If I can't get a divorce, then if I have to, I will live with you in sin." After this, hearing the approach of the carts, they reluctantly got out of bed and set to work unloading. With the help of the Swampers, they quickly finished the job, putting everything in Jake's house. They were going to live there, and Michael could take another house. The workers were happy when Jake gave them $1 each, and they left for the city, leaving the lovers alone in their new home. They put the house in order and sat on the porch, enjoying the silence and pride in the fact that they had their own land. "This pond looks very tempting," said Emily. "Yes? Want?" She stood up and took off her clothes. While they were washing, Jake had a fantasy of seeing her naked in the pond. After dinner, they cleaned themselves up, blew out the lantern, and retired to their bedroom, making love in their new home, and then fell asleep peacefully. They enjoyed a week of making love and getting to know each other better before Michael limped off, barely holding onto his horse. He got another house, despite his protests that Emily was his wife. She told him straight up that it was over between them and they were going to get a divorce. She no longer had the time or patience for a fool like him. Michael stayed here for several months, never deciding to take up cattle farming, until he heard about a gold rush in a place called Cassiar in northern Canada. He left to make his fortune and was never heard from again. A few months later, Emily received a divorce. The judge accepted her statement that Michael had abandoned her. 5 minutes later, the same judge married her to Jake. They lived a happy life. Emily gave birth to Jake 3 children. Jake gave up guns, using them only when necessary to protect his family and land. They worked hard on their land, turning it into a profitable cattle ranch, and over the years gained a reputation for being willing to help those in need, especially wives who were left widowed or without a livelihood because of an ignorant husband who did not have the slightest idea about the realities of the West. Jake died at the age of 70, and Emily followed him, not wanting to live another day without her Yakey. Their grave is overlooked the pond where they spent so much time together, living and making love. One of the memories that their grandchildren still talk about is when Grandpa and Grandma were arguing. Grandma would call him the mighty fly chaser, and Grandpa would blush and go silent. And a little later, they laughed and giggled together at some personal joke. There was some kind of secret about it, and no one ever found out what it was. And on warm moonlit nights, when the mice tremble in their holes from the cry of a hungry owl, the family swears that they can hear the ghostly splashing in the water of the pond and the breathy whisper of Emily and Jake swearing their eternal love. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.